I wanted to go right back to your relationship with Mondraker, because you have been sort of almost synonymous with them for quite a few years.
Yeah.
You know, when was it sort of when forward geometry first came out that you first started loving them? Was it before then, or because obviously forward geometry for a tall guy, you know, obviously, you know, Seb, who now works for Pinkbike but was working for us for a long time, was another guy who sort of like, so I've got bikes that fit. Like, was that the sort of the genesis of it?
Exactly that. Yeah. So I think just before it, you had a Dune that was pre-forward geometry.
Yeah, maybe.
And I remember liking the look of the bike, but it was too small, so I didn't pay any attention to it. And you went out and did a feature with Fabian with the prototype.
Yeah, 2011.
And you were like, you need to look at this. Like, this is right up your street sort of thing. And I looked at it and I was like, I'm sure it's all right. But at this point, I was riding a Ibis Mojo HD XL, and the reach on it was, I think it's about 412. Which sounds crazy.
It's not.
Yeah.
You serious?
There was respect of an 80mm stem as standard.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's wild, isn't it? So if you look back at these numbers.
2012?
Yeah, about 2012, I'd say, yeah. So 26-inch wheel.
That's
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some other numbers I could quote that'll make you laugh about things as well. But yeah, so I was riding that, and then I got that frame sent through, and that was, so I only did two sizes, the medium and the large, and the medium had a 480 reach and the large and 500 reach.
Back then?
Yeah, but that was with a 10mm stem.
With that stem, 10
that
mil.
was the standard stem.
Yeah,
at the time.
so, and the first ride I went on that, I got pinch punch on a front wheel, which I'd never had before, and I was a bit like, oh, that's weird. Didn't think anything of it. I was like, suspension feels awful. Like, and then I realised I had to basically recalibrate everything the way I rode, and I was riding into stuff harder, and I was literally like, this is like mind blowing how good this is. And obviously, the entire industry universally has incrementally got there. But I've said this pre-Mondraker, and I'll forever say it, for any bike brand to make a decision that ballsy and do it in on a production bike. So the XR was the model that had forward geometry, and they
only
did
on the Foxy.
Dune Factor 120mm bike with forward geometry, like crazy.
But do you remember originally when I saw it in prototype form, it was called Center Stem. That's what they wanted to call it. I looked back at the article I wrote for Bike Radar, and I searched forward geometry, and I was like,
it didn't
you can
exist.
only find the reviews you've done.
Yeah.
And then I remembered, they call it that, and I was like, oh, thank God they changed it.
Yeah, yeah, and so, you know, essentially they took the stem back to 10mm and then put the 60mm on the front end. Is basically how it translates. So your cockpit position's the same per size, but your front centre's massive. And when the penny really dropped for me was getting back on the Mojo, which I loved, and it was a great bike, and I almost couldn't ride it. Because it felt like suddenly, the wheels are really close together, and I'm like an isosceles triangle. So my head was all the way up here and the wheels are close. So whatever I'm doing, climbing or descending, I'm moving my weight all the time to keep balance. Whereas on that, my weight was more or less in the middle most of the time. Suddenly I've got equal traction, could ride up stuff without the front wheel coming off the ground, could ride down stuff like it was a mini downhill bike. I was like, that's it. And to the point I almost had to stop riding it on a mag because everything else was so much like shorter with longer stems. It became difficult. Yeah, it was a bit of a problem. But in my head, I was like, yeah, that's it. Like, that's the way. So, yeah, it's always been there. And I think I was because of that bike, I was always looking for long bikes. And I don't know if you remember, but one of the other cool projects, which I've forgotten to tell you about, was Jeff Steiber with Intense.
Yes, that was well cool.
So he was like, hey, why don't you come over and we'll see how we can build a bike? And I was like, could I pick the geometry of the bike? And he was like, yeah, sure. And I could feel his sort of talk on the call. He was just like, why would you pick the geometry? Like, I'm the one that makes the bikes around here. And I was like, yeah, I basically gave him the numbers off a sheet of that. I was like, this is what we're going to build. And he was like, okay, pretty strange geometry. Rang up Israel, got him to send me a stem and went over there to Temecula. And he's like, literally didn't have tubing long enough to build it. So the top tube wasn't even a bike top tube. I say wasn't. I've still got it in my loft. I don't even know what it's from. It's a really weird shaped tube. The down tube was off a Socom downhill bike for Chris Cavari that never got made. So that was like a one piece. It was hydroformed and it was really long. And he goes, we can get close to it. We can't quite get it. So it's a little bit shorter, but still, it was close. And then he made that for me. Rode it on the 951 trails in Temecula, which again was another like
tick.
951 trails.
It's got custom intents.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that's like
built by Jeff Steiber.
We were talking about getting custom Troy Lee lids earlier, and I mean that absolutely just
that trip from the nerdy front was my last major trip I did with MBUK, and it was probably one of the best trips I've done anywhere in or out of work. So it was me and Steve Bear. We flew into LA. We went to Temecula first, did the bike project, built the bike, rode it on the 951 trails. Then we drove to Laguna and went riding with Hans Ray, went to his house. And even Hans, he was shocked how easily I could ride down stuff and do stoppies on that, because I was like, this is easy. And you can see he was like, what does he know that I don't know? And I'm like, you've got a tiller on your bike and I've got a proper stem.
Yeah.
Here's the difference. And then went riding with Brian Lopes as well, went to Sheep Hills, and like literally ticks off all of these things. It was just wild. Then we went up through Santa Barbara and went up to Sea Otter. And then Intense at the time, I forget the model of bike. It was a carbon, might have been a Tracer 275. Let's just say it was that one. They were launching a carbon bike that year at Sea Otter, and they had loads of them. They had black and white ones and red and black ones on their stand.
Yeah.
And my alloy freak bike that was on there got more attention, and I feel like there was a bit of, they didn't like it, and they hid it out the back, and after a while they asked me to move it. And I went to see Stickman over at Intense, over at Troy Lee, lent it up, and then Robin Schmidt from, I forgot his publication, from Enduro Mag, was like, what's this? And I was like, oh, that's my custom bike. He's like, you got a custom Intense? I was like, yeah. He was like, I'll take some pictures. And he took some pictures. And as soon as he started taking pictures, so I think some German journalists walked past, they're like, what's that? They started taking pictures. And I'm like, if I was taking pictures of this bike that doesn't exist, I was like, this is super cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, I only ever rode it a few times back in the UK, ironically, because I was just never a fan of the early VPP.
Right.
So much later, VPP got really good, but the early stuff had like, the real extended lower link. So it had a real distinct thing that it did in the suspension curve. If you were like, I don't know, like going through a bomb hole and you hit like a big hole, if you're like halfway through the travel, it would feel like the bike stalls slightly. Like I can't describe it better than that. It's so distinct to those early ones. But I mean, the bike looks just so sick. It's raw. Like, it's amazing.
Did you see it?
I knew of it. So, because I would have been around at that point.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
again, like, I think I was on curly bars and just...
It was
I've got it exactly as I last rode it,
Okay.
with flat tyres and brakes that need bleeding. But same as that. It was sat next to it in the loft, like, ready to use. So again, I'm going to get it out again at some point.